Desperate, she sold her virginity to a mysterious millionaire she had never seen before. But the man who bought her carried scars from the past and an old love for her mother. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you are listening from. Emily Johnson walked through the deserted streets of New York City at 5 in the morning, carrying on her back the weight of another night of work and the burden of a life that never seemed to find light. Her steps were silent, almost ghostly, as if she feared waking the sleeping city around her. At 20 years old, she had learned to be invisible, to occupy the smallest possible space in the world, as if her existence was a constant apology. Her blue cleaning uniform was wrinkled. After 8 hours of cleaning the offices of the Wall Street Business Tower, one of the most imposing buildings in the financial district. Between the mirrored walls and designer furniture, Emily cleaned traces of lives that would never be hers. Crystal glasses with remnants of champagne from million-dollar celebrations, contract papers that moved fortunes, expensive perfumes impregnated in Italian leather armchairs. Each object she touched was a reminder of the distance between her world and that golden universe. That morning, however, something different weighed on her chest. The folded white envelope in her pants pocket contained words that changed everything. The doctor had been direct, without beating around the bush. Mrs. Sarah Johnson needs an urgent kidney transplant. The public system has a 2-year waiting list. Without immediate private treatment, she has 4 months at most. 4 months. Emily mentally repeated the numbers as she climbed the 3 flights of stairs in the building where she lived in Queens. The house was small, 2 cramped rooms that she and her mother called home. Sarah slept on the sofa bed in the living room, connected to an improvised dialysis machine that the health clinic had loaned. At 52, the woman who had once been vibrant and full of dreams was now withering in a daily struggle against kidney failure that slowly consumed her. Emily observed her sleeping mother and felt her chest tighten. Sarah had always been her only support in the world. When her father abandoned them, Sarah worked 3 jobs to support her daughter. When Emily was rejected by schoolmates for wearing old clothes, Sarah hand-sewed new dresses from scraps. When adolescence brought questions about body and sexuality, Sarah responded with a rigid religious education that, although suffocating, came from the fear of seeing her daughter repeat her own mistakes. Emily's childhood had been shaped by silence and restraint. Sarah, marked by the traumatic experience of getting pregnant at 18 by a man who abandoned her, raised her daughter under an inflexible Christian morality. Any manifestation of sensuality was sin. Any romantic interest, danger. Dating was forbidden. Going out at night, unthinkable. The body was a sacred temple, but Emily felt that hers had become more of a prison than a sanctuary. At 20, she had never kissed a man. She had never even allowed anyone to touch her hand with romantic intention. Her co-workers sometimes joked about her excessive shyness, but Emily had learned to hide behind an armor of invisibility. It was safer to be ignored than to be at risk. Now, however, faced with the possibility of losing the only person she loved in the world, Emily felt that all the rules she had followed meant nothing. What good was preserving herself if she couldn't save the one who mattered most? She sat at the tiny kitchen table and spread the medical bills across the worn surface. Tests, consultations, medications. The transplant would cost $200,000, an impossible amount for someone earning minimum wage cleaning offices. She had tried everything in the past few weeks. She had asked for loans that were denied due to lack of guarantees. She had sought NGOs that had endless waiting lists. She had sold the few valuable items she owned: her grandmother's wedding ring, her mother's small graduation ring, some old books, but the money barely covered the month's medications. It was on one of those nights of desperation, browsing the internet in search of any solution, that Emily found something that made her stop breathing. A discreet forum, hidden in the depths of the web, where special opportunities for women in urgent financial need were discussed. The messages were coded, but Emily wasn't naive. She knew exactly what it was about. Wealthy men willing to pay fortunes for specific experiences. One-time encounters. Virgin women were particularly sought after. The values mentioned in the conversations ranged from $50,000 to $300,000, depending on the circumstances and conditions of the candidate. Emily closed the computer borrowed from her neighbor and spent 3 days unable to sleep. The idea disgusted and fascinated her at the same time, not out of sexual curiosity, but because of the cruel mathematics. 1 night in exchange for her mother's life. It was a simple and devastating equation. On the 4th night, Sarah had a crisis. The ambulance took 40 minutes to arrive. At the hospital, the doctor was clear. She doesn't have 4 months anymore. She has maybe 2, if we're lucky. Emily held her mother's cold hand on the stretcher and made a decision that would forever change the course of her life. Back at the computer, she created an anonymous profile on the forum. Fake name, edited photo showing only her eyes. In the description, she was direct. 20-year-old woman, virgin, no experience, seeking one-time encounter for urgent family medical reason. Minimum value $200,000. She published the ad at 3 in the morning and closed the computer, trembling. When she returned to check 12 hours later, there were dozens of messages. Men offering various amounts, asking invasive questions, proposing meetings in expensive hotels. Emily read each message with a churning stomach, trying to identify which proposal seemed safest, if any of them could be considered safe. It was then that a different message arrived. New account, no history, just 1 line, $300,000, hotel of your choice, just 1 night, no extra obligations, reply if interested. The amount was exactly what she needed for the transplant and post-operative care. Emily looked at the room where her mother was coughing uncontrollably and typed a single word. Interested. Nathan Riley was in his office on the 40th floor of the most modern building in Soho when the notification arrived. The monitoring system he had created to track suspicious activities on the internet had just captured something interesting. A young woman offering her virginity in exchange for money to pay for medical treatment. Normally, this type of content would be automatically blocked and reported to the authorities, but something in the profile made him pause. The girl's eyes in the photo were familiar. Very familiar. Nathan enlarged the image, adjusted the contrast, ran his facial recognition algorithms. The result left him breathless. Emily Johnson, daughter of Sarah Johnson, the nurse who had saved his life 28 years ago. At 35, Nathan had built an empire based on digital security technology, but his $2 billion fortune couldn't erase the scars of a devastating childhood. Orphaned by his mother since the age of 7, he spent his adolescence in public shelters, where he learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His father, a violent alcoholic, disappeared shortly after his mother's death, leaving Nathan delivered to a system that treated him as a number, not as a child. It was at Hope Shelter, at 12, that he met Sarah Johnson. She had just graduated in nursing and worked as a volunteer, caring for children who arrived injured, physically and emotionally. Nathan was one of the most difficult cases, too intelligent for his age, suspicious of any gesture of affection, violent when feeling cornered. Sarah was the first adult who didn't try to dominate him or break his resistance. Instead, she simply existed beside him, offering care without demanding gratitude, love without conditions. When Nathan had pneumonia and almost died, Sarah spent 3 nights awake by his bedside. When he hacked the shelter's computer system at 13, instead of punishing him, she helped him channel his genius into something constructive. For 2 years, Sarah was the only person Nathan completely trusted. She had taught him that not all women abandoned, that not all affection had a price. At 14, he was hopelessly in love with her, an adolescent, impossible, and devastating love. Sarah, then 22 years old, never noticed or never showed that she noticed. When Nathan turned 16 and left the shelter to live on his own, Sarah moved to another neighborhood. He tried to keep in touch, but she gently pulled away, claiming that he needed to build an independent life. The last time he saw her, Sarah was pregnant. She didn't say who the father was, only smiled with that sweetness that always disarmed him, and said it would be a girl. Nathan never forgot her. For years he built his fortune with an obsession to find Sarah again. He hired detectives, hacked databases, tracked public records. He discovered that she had had a daughter named Emily, that the father had abandoned the family, that Sarah had worked 3 jobs to support the girl alone. He also discovered their current address, the precarious financial situation, Sarah's health problems, but he never had the courage to approach. What would he say? "Hello, Sarah, I'm the troubled boy you cared for 2 decades ago who fell in love with you." Instead, he helped from afar. Anonymous hospital bill payments, mysterious scholarships for Emily, donations to the health clinic where Sarah was being treated. They never knew he was the hidden benefactor. Now, looking at Emily's ad, Nathan felt a toxic mixture of anger, possessiveness, and opportunity. The girl was offering her virginity to save her mother, the mother he had loved and never could have, the daughter who carried the blood of the woman who had taught him to feel. Nathan hacked the forum in minutes. He created fake profiles, manipulated the recommendation algorithms, ensured that only his proposal reached Emily. $300,000, exactly the amount she needed. Luxury hotel, just 1 night, no extra obligations. He would be gentle. He would be respectful. He would be everything she needed him to be. But as he typed the message, Nathan knew he was lying to himself. It wasn't generosity, it was possession. It wasn't salvation. It was the chance to possess something that had belonged to the woman who had rejected him without even knowing she was doing so. Emily's reply came in less than an hour. Interested. 1 word that would seal the fate of both. Nathan immediately transferred the money to a temporary account that would be released after the meeting. Then he sent detailed instructions. The Plaza Hotel, Presidential Suite, Saturday at 8 o'clock. She should present herself at the reception as Ms. Sanders and would receive the suite card. He would be waiting. During the 3 days leading up to the meeting, Nathan oscillated between unhealthy excitement and overwhelming guilt. He hired a detective to investigate Emily's life more deeply. He discovered that she worked cleaning, night offices, that she had never had a boyfriend, that she lived only to care for her sick mother. He also discovered that Sarah was really dying. The kidney failure was in the terminal stage. On Friday, Nathan made a decision that would complicate everything. He traveled to New York and went by the cleaning company where Emily worked. He stayed in the parking lot at 5 in the morning, just observing when she came off shift. She was small, delicate, with the same dark, deep eyes as her mother. But there was something broken in her that Sarah had never had. An old sadness, a silent surrender that made him want to protect her and possess her at the same time. On Saturday night, Nathan arrived at the suite 2 hours before the scheduled time. He took 3 shots of whiskey to calm his nerves, checked 10 times if the money was in the correct account, mentally rehearsed how he would be gentle, how he wouldn't scare her. But when he heard the soft knock on the door at 8 o'clock sharp, Nathan realized that nothing could have prepared him for that moment. Emily was standing in the corridor, wearing a borrowed coat that was too big for her, carrying a small handbag and an expression of barely disguised terror. She was even more beautiful in person, and even more broken. Nathan looked at her in silence for long seconds, memorizing every detail, looking for traces of Sarah in her face. "Are you?" she began to ask, her voice almost a whisper. "You can call me Nathan," he replied, stepping aside to let her in, "and you must be Emily." She hesitated at the door, like a wounded animal deciding between fleeing or surrendering. Nathan realized she was trembling, from fear, from cold, or from both. When she finally entered the suite, Emily looked around with wide eyes. She had never been in such a luxurious place. "The money has already been transferred," Nathan said, trying to sound professional. "You can check the account you provided." Emily took out her old cell phone and checked. The $300,000 were there. She closed her eyes, and Nathan saw tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she murmured. You saved my mother's life." And it was at that moment that Nathan realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The silence in the suite was deafening. Emily remained standing near the door as if she could still escape, while Nathan observed her from the other side of the luxurious room. Between them stretched not only the physical distance of a few meters, but an abyss of expectations, fears, and unrevealed secrets. "Would you like something to drink?" Nathan asked, gesturing toward the suite's bar. His voice sounded hoarser than normal, betraying a nervousness he didn't expect to feel. "Water? Wine? Something stronger?" Emily shook her head, clutching the strap of her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I've never drunk alcohol," she murmured, avoiding looking directly at him. "My mother always said that—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Nathan understood. Sarah had raised her daughter with strict rules, protections that now seemed cruelly ironic given the situation they found themselves in. "Your mother," Nathan began slowly, testing the ground. "Does she know where you are tonight?" Emily's face contorted in an expression of pure pain. "I told her I got an advance at work, that one of the bosses took pity on our situation and decided to help." Her tears began to flow again. "She was so happy, said it was a miracle from God." Guilt hit Nathan like a punch, down to the stomach. Here was the daughter of the woman he had loved, prostituting herself to save her mother's life, while he, who could have solved everything with a simple check, had chosen to transform her desperation into his opportunity for possession. "Emily," he said, taking a step toward her, "I don't have to do this. The money is already in your account. You can leave now if you want." She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and distrust. "I don't understand. You paid for a night. I have to fulfill my part of the agreement." "No," Nathan shook his head. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, ever." For the first time since she entered the suite, Emily really looked at him. She studied his face, looking for signs of lies or manipulation. Nathan forced himself to remain still under her scrutiny, letting her evaluate him. "Why would you do this?" she finally asked. "Why would you give me all this money and not expect anything in return?" It was a question for which Nathan didn't have an honest answer. He couldn't say that he knew her mother, that he had fallen in love with Sarah when he was a teenager, that he had tracked their lives for years. He couldn't admit that his generosity was actually a disguised obsession. "Maybe because I understand what it's like to love someone, to the point of doing anything to save them," he said. And that part at least was true. Emily took a few steps into the suite, finally releasing the strap of her bag. "Do you have someone you love like that?" she asked. "I did," Nathan replied. "Once." "What happened?" "She never knew I existed, not in the way I wanted her to know." Emily nodded, as if she perfectly understood the feeling. "It must be terrible to love someone who can't love you back." "It is," Nathan agreed. "But perhaps it's even worse to be loved by someone you can't love in the way they deserve." They were silent again, but now it was a different silence, less charged with fear, more filled with a mutual understanding about loneliness and sacrifice. "May I sit?" Emily asked, indicating the suite sofa. "Of course, this is your night. You can do whatever you want." Emily sat on the edge of the sofa, maintaining an upright posture, hands folded in her lap. Nathan chose the armchair on the other side of the coffee table, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "You're very different from what I expected," Emily said after a moment. "What did you expect?" "Someone older, more frightening. Maybe someone who would treat me like an object." She paused, blushing slightly. "I'm sorry, that wasn't very polite." Nathan laughed, a low sound without humor. "You have every right to have expected that. Most men who frequent these environments would probably fit that description. But not you." "I don't know what I am," Nathan admitted, with an honesty that surprised him. "I know I have a lot of money. I know I have a lot of power. I know I can get almost anything I want, but I don't know if that makes me better or worse than others." Emily studied him with curiosity. "How did you get so much money? You seem young." "Technology," Nathan explained. "I created a digital security system that now protects banks and governments around the world. I started when I was 16 in a public shelter with a broken computer that I fixed myself." "You grew up in a shelter?" "Yes, my parents, well, let's say they weren't exactly present." Emily nodded with understanding. I grew up just with my mother. My father abandoned us when I was 3 years old. We never saw him again. Your mother is a very strong woman to have raised you alone. Yes. Emily smiled for the first time since she arrived. She was always my heroine. She worked mornings as a cleaner, afternoons as a cook in a school, and at night she sewed clothes for extra money, all to give me a decent education. And now you're here doing this for her. Emily's smile disappeared. There was no other choice. I tried everything. Loans, NGOs, distant relatives. Nobody had $200,000 to lend to a cleaner. And if there was another way, Nathan asked carefully, if you could save your mother without being here? But there isn't, Emily answered with the resignation of someone who had already explored all possibilities. And even if there were, it's too late. I've already made the decision. The money is already in the account. I'm already here. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Emily, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, tonight or what doesn't happen, you owe me nothing. You are a brave woman making an impossible sacrifice out of love. That doesn't diminish you. It makes you extraordinary. For the first time, Emily looked him directly in the eyes and didn't look away. Why are you being so kind to me? Nathan knew this was his chance to tell the truth, to explain about Sarah, about the past, about the real reasons that brought him there. But looking at the vulnerability in Emily's face, at the fragile trust she was beginning to place in him, Nathan realized that the truth would be too cruel a burden for her to carry at that moment. Because you deserve kindness, he said simply, and because maybe I need to learn to be a better person. Emily was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Finally, she rose from the sofa and walked to the window that overlooked Central Park. The city lights reflected in her eyes like fallen stars. It's beautiful, she murmured. I've never seen the city from such a high place. Nathan joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance. Do you want to go out on the balcony? The view is even better. Emily nodded and Nathan opened the glass doors. The night breeze entered the suite, bringing the sounds of the city and the smell of autumn. They stood side by side on the balcony, contemplating the view in silence. Thank you, Emily finally said. For what? For treating me like a person, for making me feel that maybe I'm not as terrible as I thought I was. Nathan looked at her, really looked, and felt something breaking inside his chest. Emily wasn't just Sarah's daughter. She was a whole person, with fears and dreams, and a silent strength that made her beautiful in a way that transcended physical appearance. And it was at that moment that Nathan realized he was falling in love with her. The night progressed in an unexpected way. Instead of the cold transaction that both had anticipated, Nathan and Emily found themselves talking like two people who discovered they weren't as alone in the world as they thought. He ordered room service, grilled salmon with risotto for him, a simple hamburger for her because Emily admitted she had never tried gourmet food and didn't want to risk getting sick from nerves. Tell me about your mother when she was young, Nathan said as they dined on the balcony under the stars of New York. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he couldn't resist the temptation to hear Emily talk about Sarah. Emily smiled, and Nathan noticed how she became even more beautiful when she relaxed. Mom was different when I was little. More free, I guess. She would sing while cooking, dance with me in the living room, listening to the radio. Sometimes she told me stories about the time she worked as a nurse, about the children she cared for. Children? Nathan asked, forcing his voice to sound casual. Yes, she worked in a shelter when she was young. She said some children arrived very hurt, not just physically. She always talked about a special boy, very intelligent, who she helped recover. Emily paused, playing with the food on her plate. I think that job really marked her. She always said that caring for those in need was the most important thing a person could do. Nathan's heart raced. Sarah had remembered him. She had told Emily about him. All these years he hadn't been just another forgotten child in her memory. And what happened to that boy? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I don't know. Mom said he grew up and left the shelter. She never heard from him again. Emily looked at him with curiosity. Why do you want to know? Nathan looked away toward the city skyline. Just curious. Your mother seems to have been a very special person. She is, and that's why I need to save her. The determination in Emily's voice was absolute. She sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn to sacrifice for her. Even if it means sacrificing yourself. Emily was silent for a long moment. Do you think I'm sacrificing myself? I think you're giving your first intimate experience to a stranger in exchange for money. If that's not sacrifice, I don't know what is. And what if I don't want it to be just a sacrifice? Emily asked, surprising them both. What if I want it to mean something? Nathan stopped eating and looked at her intensely. What are you saying? Emily blushed deeply, but maintained eye contact. I'm saying that you're not what I expected. You're being kind. You're treating me like a person, not like a thing. And She hesitated, took a deep breath. I've never felt attracted to anyone before, but tonight, talking with you, I feel things. The desire that Nathan had tried to control all night intensified dangerously. Emily, you don't need to feel this. You don't owe me anything, remember? I know, but what if I want to? What if it's my choice? Nathan got up from his chair and walked to the balcony railing, gripping it tightly. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Emily approached him slowly. I'm 20 years old, Nathan. I've never kissed anyone. I've never wanted to kiss anyone. But tonight, looking at you, listening to you talk, I feel like maybe I want to know what it's like. Nathan turned to her, and the proximity between them was almost unbearable. If we do this, it won't be just about the money, not for me. Not for me either, Emily murmured, raising her hand and gently touching his face. Maybe it's about two lonely people, finding a little tenderness amid so much pain. When Nathan tilted his face and kissed her hand, Emily felt something awaken in her body that she had never experienced, a wave of heat that started in her stomach and spread to every nerve ending. Nathan gently pulled her closer, and she didn't resist. Are you sure? He whispered against her lips. No, she admitted with brutal honesty, but I want to try. The first kiss was tentative, almost shy. Nathan knew he needed to go slow, that Emily had never been touched by anyone. But when she sighed against his mouth and deepened the kiss, he felt he was lost. They returned to the suite hand in hand like nervous teenagers. Nathan lit only a few candles, creating soft lighting that made Emily feel less exposed. They sat on the bed side by side, and he began to kiss her again, his hands exploring her face, her neck, always waiting for permission before going further. I don't know what to do, Emily confessed when he began to unbutton her blouse. You don't need to know, you just need to feel. And Emily felt. She felt Nathan's hands trembling slightly as he undressed her with reverence, as if she were something precious. She felt his breathing accelerating when she touched his bare chest for the first time. She felt a terrible vulnerability and, at the same time, a sensation of power that she had never imagined possessing. When Nathan stopped and looked at her, completely naked in the soft candlelight, Emily expected to feel ashamed. Instead, she saw adoration in his eyes, and it made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. You're perfect, he whispered, and she believed him. What happened next was both gentle and intense, painful and pleasurable. Nathan was patient, careful, whispering words of encouragement and constantly checking if she was okay. Emily cried, not from pain, but from an overwhelming emotion that she didn't know how to name. It was as if all the barriers she had built around her heart were crumbling all at once. When it was over, they lay embraced in silence, their bodies intertwined, their breathing gradually calming. Emily traced circles on Nathan's chest with her fingertips, marveling at the intimacy of the moment. Nathan, she murmured against his neck. Yes? Thank you for making this beautiful. I always thought it would be horrible. Nathan tightened, the embrace kissing the top of her head. Thank you for letting me be part of something so special. They slept like that, and when Emily woke the next morning, she found an envelope on the nightstand with her name written in Nathan's elegant Handwriting. Inside, besides a card with his phone number, there was a note. "Emily, this night meant more to me than you can imagine. If you ever need anything, call me. And if you ever want to see me again, not for money, but because you want to, I'll be waiting. With affection, Nathan." When she turned to talk to him, Nathan was already gone. Emily dressed slowly, still feeling the echoes of the previous night in her body. For the first time in her life, she had felt desired, protected, valued, and for the first time, she understood what people meant when they talked about making love, not just having sex. But as she returned home by taxi, Emily also knew that it had been just one night, a beautiful, transformative but temporary night. Nathan was a billionaire. She was a cleaner. They lived in completely different worlds. That night had been a gift for both. But now she needed to return to reality. What Emily didn't know was that Nathan was far from considering her past. In fact, after one night in her arms, he was more obsessed than ever. And men like Nathan Riley didn't usually accept that things ended when they didn't want them to end. 3 weeks passed since that night at the Plaza Hotel, and Nathan couldn't get Emily out of his head. He tried to immerse himself in work, closed, $2 million contracts, flew to meetings in New York and London, but nothing worked. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in the candlelight. Every time a woman approached him at social events, he compared her to Emily, and they all seemed artificial, calculating, empty. The worst part was that he knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. His monitoring systems had become a personal obsession. Nathan knew that Emily had immediately transferred all the money to Sarah Johnson's medical account, that the transplant had been scheduled for the following week, that she continued working in the same offices every night, as if nothing had changed in her life. But something had changed. The security cameras of the buildings where she worked showed a different Emily. She walked with less haste, looked out the windows during breaks, sometimes smiled for no apparent reason. Nathan hated himself for spying on her, but he couldn't stop. It was on a Thursday that he made the decision that would change everything. Again. He discovered that the cleaning company Cleantech, where Emily worked, was experiencing financial difficulties. The owner, a 60-year-old man named Manuel, was desperate to sell the business and retire. Nathan bought the company in 2 hours, through a succession of shell companies that made it impossible to trace the purchase back to him. On Friday morning, Nathan was sitting in the Cleantech meeting room when the employees arrived for an emergency meeting. Emily entered last, still in the uniform from the previous night, her hair tied in a simple bun. When their eyes met across the crowded room, Nathan saw pure shock written on her face. "Good morning, everyone," Nathan began, forcing his voice to sound professional. "My name is Nathan Riley, and I have just acquired Cleantech. I want to reassure you, no one will be fired, all salaries will be maintained, and in fact I will implement some improvements in benefits." A murmur of relief ran through the room, but Emily remained motionless, looking at him with an expression that mixed confusion, anger, and something that could be fear. "I would like to speak individually with each employee to get to know the team better," Nathan continued. "Ms. Johnson, could you stay after the others leave?" Emily nodded stiffly, and Nathan had to struggle to maintain professional composure for the rest of the meeting. When they finally were alone in the room, the silence was deafening. "You bought the company where I work," Emily said, not as a question but as a statement. "Yes." "Why?" Nathan got up and walked to the window, unable to look at her while lying. "It was a business opportunity. The company was in trouble. The price was good." "Lie." Emily's voice was low but firm. "You have billions of dollars. Why would you buy a small cleaning company that can barely pay its employees?" Nathan turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her take a step back. "Maybe because I couldn't stop thinking about you since that night." The brutal honesty of the confession left Emily speechless for a moment. "Nathan, it was just one night, we both knew that." "And what if I don't want it to have been just one night?" "But it was," Emily insisted, though her voice betrayed an uncertainty. That didn't go unnoticed by Nathan. "You live in a completely different world than mine. You have apartments that cost more than I'll earn in my entire life. You think that matters?" Of course it matters, Emily exploded, finally letting her emotions show. Do you think you can just buy everything? Buy a night with me, buy the company where I work, maybe buy me too? Nathan took a step toward her, his eyes burning. I don't want to buy you, Emily. I want to know you. I want to know how you like your coffee, what kind of music you listen to when you're alone, what you dream about when you manage to sleep well. I want... You want to possess me, Emily interrupted him. The same way you possess everything. In your life. The accusation hit Nathan like a slap, mainly because there was a dose of truth in it. He was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Maybe, he finally admitted. Maybe I don't know how to love without possessing. Maybe I don't know how to care without controlling. But that doesn't mean what I feel for you isn't real. Emily studied him, seeing the vulnerability he rarely showed. And what do you feel for me, Nathan? I don't know, he answered with honesty. I know I think about you constantly. I know no woman has interested me since that night. I know that when I imagine you with another man, I feel like breaking things. That's not love, Emily said softly. That's obsession. What's the difference? Love wants the best for the other person, even if that means letting them go. Obsession wants to keep the person close, regardless of what's best for them. Nathan was silent, absorbing her words. Emily took the moment to head for the door. Where are you going? He asked. Home, to take care of my mother, to live my normal life. What about your job? Emily stopped at the door and turned to him. I'm going to quit. I can't work for you, Nathan, not like this. Don't do that, Nathan said, and there was a desperation in his voice that she had never heard before. Please, you need this job. I'll find another one. Not as well paid. Not with the benefits I can offer, and your mother will need continuous medical care after the transplant. Emily clenched her fists, hating that he was right. So, what are you suggesting? Nathan took a deep breath, knowing he was about to cross, a line from which he might not be able to return. Continue working for me, but not just as a cleaner. As what then? As my personal assistant. You would work in my office during the day, no more night shifts. Salary 5 times higher than current. Premium health plan for you and your mother. Company car. Emily stared at him with disbelief. And in return for nothing. Just stay close to me. Give me a chance to prove that I can be more than an obsession in your life. Nathan, please, he said, and the word came out as a plea. Just 3 months. If after that time you still want to leave, I'll let you go, and I'll make sure you have sufficient resources to start a new life anywhere you want. Emily looked at him for a long time, seeing the powerful man reduced to begging. Part of her wanted to run, knew she should run. But another part, a part that had awakened that night at the hotel, was curious. Curious about what they could be together outside the extreme circumstances that had united them. 3 months, she finally said, but with rules. Any rule you want. Nothing physical. Nothing romantic, just work. Nathan nodded, though they both knew it would be almost impossible to keep that promise with the tension that existed between them. And if I decide to leave before the 3 months, you let me go without problems. Yes. And stop spying. On me. I know you're watching me, Nathan. The cameras, the reports about my life, that stops now. Nathan hesitated only a second before agreeing. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a first step. I start Monday, Emily said, opening the door. Emily, Nathan called her when she was about to leave. Thank you. She didn't answer, but Nathan noticed that she didn't slam the door when she left. It was a small sign, but he clung to it like a drowning man clings to a lifeline in the high seas. As Emily walked home, she knew she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. 3 months working directly with Nathan Riley. 3 months trying to maintain emotional distance from a man who made her feel things she didn't even know existed. 3 months that would determine if what was between them was love or destruction. First month as Nathan's personal assistant, was a careful dance between professional proximity and emotional distance. Emily arrived punctually at 8 in the morning at the office on the 40th floor, wearing discreet suits that Nathan had sent to her home without asking her size, which made her realize he knew more about her than he should. She organized his schedule, answered calls, attended meetings, always sitting at a respectful distance, taking notes in her careful handwriting. Nathan, in turn, strived to maintain strictly professional behavior, but Emily noticed the moments when he observed her when he thought she wasn't looking. She noticed how he found excuses to extend meetings when it was just the two of them. How he constantly offered coffee, always prepared exactly as she liked it, more milk than coffee, 2 spoons of sugar, a detail she had never mentioned but that he had discovered by observing her during breaks. The first breach in her professional armor came on a rainy Tuesday when Emily received a call from the hospital during working hours. Sarah Johnson had had post-transplant complications and was in the ICU. Emily collapsed, literally. She sat on the office floor and began to cry with a desperation that broke Nathan's heart. He didn't hesitate. He cancelled all meetings of the day, carried Emily to his private car, and took her to the hospital. During the 6 hours they spent in the waiting room, Emily anchored herself to him in a way that broke all the barriers they had built. Nathan held her hand, caressed her hair, murmured words of comfort, and ensured that the best private doctors were called to evaluate Sarah's case. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked, when Sarah was finally stabilized and they returned to his apartment. She had refused to go home alone in that emotional state. "Because I care about you," Nathan replied, preparing tea to calm her nerves. "And because I care about who you love. You don't even know my mother." Nathan paused what he was doing, his back tense. It was his chance to tell the truth, to explain about the past, about Sarah being the nurse who had saved his emotional life when he was a teenager. But looking at Emily, exhausted and vulnerable on his apartment sofa, he lost courage. "I don't need to know her to know that she's important to you," he lied. "And that makes her important to me, too." That night, Emily slept in the guest room of Nathan's apartment. He stayed awake in the living room, working on his laptop but actually just watching over her, ensuring she was okay. When he heard her crying softly through the door, Nathan had to hold himself back from going in to console. The next morning, Sarah was better, but something had definitely changed between Emily and Nathan. The forced proximity during the crisis had broken part of the barriers they had built. Emily began to see beyond his obsession, noticing the genuine kindness, the real care. Nathan, in turn, saw the depth of Emily's love for her mother and understood that it was this unconditional love that attracted him so much to her. The following weeks were marked by a growing intimacy that neither of them openly admitted. Nathan began to work later to spend more time with Emily. She began to offer to work overtime, claiming she wanted to compensate for the day lost at the hospital. They often dined together in the office, talking about subjects that went far beyond work. It was during one of these dinners that Nathan finally told about his childhood in the shelter. Emily listened in silence as he described the loneliness, the abandonment, the way he had learned that love always came with conditions and usually ended in rejection. "There was a nurse," he said, playing with the food on his plate. "She was different from the others. She treated me like I mattered, you know, like I was more than just another problematic child." "What happened to her?" Emily asked, not realizing she was about to hear about her own mother. "She left when I turned 16. It was time for me to leave the shelter, and she said I needed to build my own life. I never saw her again." Nathan looked at Emily. "I think that's why I never managed to relate properly with women. I'm always afraid they'll leave." "And that's why you try to control them." "That's why I try to make it impossible for them to leave me," Nathan admitted. "I know it's wrong, but it's stronger than me." Emily extended her hand and touched his on the table. "Nathan, you don't need to trap anyone to be loved. If someone truly loves you, they'll stay by choice. And if they don't stay, then it wasn't real love," Emily said softly. "And you deserve real love." That night, for the first time in weeks, they almost kissed. They were on the office balcony, looking at the lights of New York, and the moment seemed perfect. But Emily pulled away at the last second. "We can't," she murmured. "The rules—" "Forget the rules," Nathan said, gently pulling her closer. "I can't. Not like this. Not while you're my boss and I'm your employee. Not while you have all the power and I have none." Nathan stepped back, understanding what she meant. There was a fundamental imbalance between them that made any genuine romance almost impossible. It was the following week that Emily discovered the truth about Nathan's past with her mother. She was organizing old documents in his personal archive when she found a folder with the name Sarah Johnson, written by hand. Inside there were photos, medical reports, school records, documents that covered years of her and her mother's life. There were also photos of the shelter where Nathan had lived, and in one of them, Emily immediately recognized a much younger Sarah, wearing a nurse's uniform, smiling next to a teenager who was undeniably Nathan. Emily sat heavily in the tea chair, the pieces painfully fitting together in her mind. Nathan hadn't found her by chance on the forum. He knew exactly who she was. He had manipulated the entire auction to ensure that only he could win her. He had bought her virginity not out of sexual desire, but out of an unhealthy obsession with her mother. When Nathan returned from an external meeting and found Emily sitting in his chair with the open folder in front of her, he immediately knew that everything was over. "Emily, I can explain," he began. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with contained anger. "About everything, from the first moment." "Yes. You knew my mother. You were obsessed with her." "I was. And when you couldn't have the mother, you decided to take the daughter." Nathan was silent, because there was no defense against this accusation. In part, it was exactly what had happened. "You're sick," Emily whispered, rising from the chair. "You're a sick and obsessed man, and I was an idiot for believing there could be something real between us." "Emily, please." "No!" she shouted, completely losing control. "Don't touch me, don't talk to me. I trusted you. I was beginning to feel things for you, and the whole time it was just an extension of your sick obsession with my mother." "It's not like that," Nathan said desperately. "It started that way, yes, but it became something different. What I feel for you is real. It's different from what I felt for Sarah. It's a lie," Emily interrupted him. "Everything is a lie. The 3 months are over for me now. I'm leaving, and I never want to see you in my life again." She headed for the door, but Nathan followed her. "Emily, if you leave now, I won't be able to really let you go," he said, and there was a veiled threat in his words. "Not after everything we shared." Emily turned to him, and Nathan saw that he had broken something in her that perhaps could never be fixed. "So you're going to show me who you really are?" she asked. "The obsessive and controlling man I always knew was hidden underneath?" Nathan looked at her, at the pain in her eyes, at the betrayal stamped on her face, and finally saw himself through her eyes. He saw the monster he had become. "Go," he said, stepping away from the door. "Go away before I do something we'll both regret." Emily didn't wait for a second chance. She grabbed her bag and left, leaving Nathan alone with the weight of all his lies and manipulations. And for the first time since he was a child, Nathan Riley cried. Emily disappeared from Nathan's life like smoke. She changed her phone, moved with Sarah to a different neighborhood, got a job at a cleaning company in another sector of the city. For 3 months, Nathan respected her request to stay away, not because he had found peace, but because he was immersed in a depression that incapacitated him from functioning normally. His business began to suffer. Important meetings were cancelled, contracts lost, employees fired for incompetence when in fact it was Nathan who couldn't concentrate. He began to drink alone in the office until late, looking at the chair where Emily used to sit, reliving each conversation, each smile, each moment when she had lowered her guard with him. The obsession, far from diminishing with distance, intensified in an unhealthy way. Nathan knew he was losing control, but he couldn't stop. He hired private detectives to find her, discovered where she lived, where she worked, where she passed daily. He didn't approach. He still maintained that last line of sanity, but knowing where she was became his only way to breathe. It was through these reports that he discovered something that would change everything again. Emily was pregnant. The detective delivered the photos on a grey April afternoon. Emily leaving a prenatal consultation, her stomach slightly rounded under the simple dress, a serene smile on her face that Nathan hadn't seen since the first days in the office. The dates matched perfectly. The child was his. Nathan locked himself in the office for 2 weeks, not answering calls, not seeing anyone. The news of Emily's pregnancy had detonated something primitive and possessive inside him that went beyond any rationality. She was carrying his child and keeping it a secret. She was prepared to raise it alone, away from him, as if Nathan didn't exist. When he finally emerged from his self-imposed isolation, Nathan made a decision that would definitely change the course of their lives. He would go to Emily, not to beg forgiveness or try to win her back, but to claim his right as a father. He found her on a Thursday afternoon, leaving work at a small accounting firm, where she now worked as a receptionist. Emily was 4 months pregnant, the pregnancy already visible, and Nathan felt his chest tighten when he saw her. She looked tired, thinner except for her belly, wearing clothes that no longer fit properly. "Emily," he said, appearing in front of her as she walked to the bus stop. She stopped immediately, her face losing all color. "Nathan, how did you find me? Does it matter?" Emily looked around as if searching for an escape route, then protectively placed her hand on her belly. "What do you want?" "To talk. About the baby you're expecting." The silence between them was long and charged. Emily finally sighed and indicated a nearby cafe. 5 minutes, no more than that. They sat at a table in the back of the establishment, Emily ordering an orange juice, Nathan a coffee he didn't touch. He studied her in silence, noting the dark circles, the paleness, the thinner wrists. "You're not taking proper care of yourself," he said finally. "I'm taking perfectly good care of myself." "Lie, you're thinner, pale. When was the last time you ate red meat? That you took decent prenatal vitamins?" Emily stared at him with irritation. "It's none of your business." "It's my child, isn't it?" Nathan asked directly. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes. And you were planning to tell me when or never?" "Never," Emily replied with brutal honesty. "You lost any right to know about this when you lied about everything from the first day." Nathan felt anger and pain in equal proportions. "It's my child, Emily. Regardless of what happened between us, this child is half mine." "Biologically, yes, but you will not be the father of this child, Nathan. Not after everything you did. And you think you can stop me?" Emily looked at him with a mixture of defiance and fear. "I'll try." Nathan took a deep breath, forcing himself to maintain control. "Emily, I know I ruined everything. I know I lied, manipulated, that I was obsessed and controlling, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm going to have a child, and I want to be part of that child's life." "Why? To control it too? To transform it into an extension of your obsession?" The question hit Nathan like a punch, mainly because there was truth in it. He had spent weeks asking himself exactly this, if he would be capable of being a healthy father, or if he would transmit his traumas to the child. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe, but I want to try to be better." "Trying isn't enough, Nathan. A child isn't an experiment. It's not a chance for you to redeem yourself for your mistakes with me. So what do you propose? That I disappear? That I pretend my child doesn't exist?" Emily was silent for a long time, her hand still protectively over her belly. "I propose that you leave me alone, that you let our child grow away from your toxicity, that you find professional help for your problems before thinking about being a father to any child." "And if I don't accept that?" Emily stood up from the chair. "Then I'll fight against you with all the strength I have. And maybe I don't have your money or your power, but I have something you don't have. I love this child unconditionally. Not out of obsession, not out of possessiveness, but out of real love. And that will always be stronger than anything you can buy." Nathan remained seated as she headed for the exit, then followed her to the street. "Emily," he called her. "If you change your mind, "If you need anything." "I won't need it," she replied without turning around, "and I won't change my mind." Nathan stood on the sidewalk watching her disappear into the crowd, feeling something definitively breaking inside his chest. For the first time in his life, he had found something that his money and power couldn't conquer: Emily's forgiveness and the right to be a father to his own child. That night, alone in his apartment overlooking the city, Nathan made a decision that would change everything. If Emily thought he was too toxic to be a father, he would prove otherwise, not through manipulation or control, but by doing exactly what she had suggested: seeking professional help. He called the most renowned psychiatrist in New York and scheduled a session for the next day. Then he called his lawyer and instructed that all detectives be dismissed, all surveillance on Emily be stopped. If he wanted a real chance to be a father, he would have to start by respecting the mother of his child. But as he tried to sleep that night, Nathan couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Emily had said "our child," not "my child," but "our child." Perhaps somewhere inside her anger and pain there was still a door ajar, and Nathan was willing to do anything to find the key to that door, even if it meant confronting the demons he had spent his whole life trying to avoid, even if it meant admitting that Emily was right about him, even if it meant discovering if he was capable of loving without possessing, of protecting without controlling, of being a man worthy of the love of a woman like Emily. The journey to become a better man would begin the next day, but the result of that transformation would determine not only his future, but the future of the child to come and of the woman he had never managed to forget. 6 months passed since the last encounter between Nathan and Emily. 6 months during which Nathan immersed himself in a journey of self-knowledge that forced him to confront every toxic aspect of his personality. Dr. Henry Morris, a psychiatrist with 40 years of experience, had no mercy on him from the first session. "You don't love Nathan," the doctor had said with clinical brutality. "You collect people, experiences, moments. Your obsession with Emily is just an extreme manifestation of your fear of abandonment, transformed into a need for control." The sessions were 3 times a week, and each one left Nathan emotionally devastated. He discovered that his obsessive need to control the people he loved came from the trauma of having lost his mother so young, of having been abandoned by his father, of having fallen in love with Sarah only for her to also disappear from his life. Emily had become the repository of all these accumulated fears. "But I really care about her," Nathan insisted during a particularly difficult session. "You care about the idea of her," Dr. Morris corrected. "About the fantasy you constructed. The real Emily has with her fears, her independence, her capacity to reject you. That woman you constantly tried to mold to fit your need for control." It was painful, but Nathan began to realize the truth in those words. He had bought the company where she worked to keep her close. He had lied about knowing her mother because the truth could give Emily too much power over him. He had watched her every move because he couldn't accept that she had a life independent from his. Meanwhile, Emily lived her pregnancy alone, working part-time and caring for Sarah, who was recovering well from the transplant. She didn't know that Nathan had stopped watching her, didn't know about the therapy sessions, didn't know that he spent nights awake imagining what it would be like to hold his child in his arms. The real change in Nathan began when he realized that his love for Emily, if he could call it that, was killing any chance of her ever trusting him again. During a session, Dr. Morris asked a question that changed everything. If you really loved Emily, what would you do for her? Anything, Nathan replied immediately, including letting her go forever. Nathan was silent for several minutes. The question touched the center of his deepest fear. I don't know, he finally admitted. I don't know if I could. Then you don't love her. You love yourself through her. It was at that moment that Nathan understood the difference between love and obsession. Real love meant wanting the best for the other person, even if that meant losing that person. Obsession meant wanting to keep the person close, regardless of the emotional cost to them. Nathan began to make concrete changes in his life. He donated half of his fortune to institutions that cared for orphan children. including the same shelter where he had met Sarah. He began to work only as necessary, delegating responsibilities that he previously insisted on controlling personally. Most importantly, he began to deal with the real possibility of never seeing Emily or knowing his child. It was on a Tuesday in September that everything changed again. Nathan was leaving Dr. Morris's office when he saw an ambulance stopping in front of the nearby hospital. His instinct made him look more carefully, and his heart stopped when he saw Emily being taken on a stretcher to the emergency room, 8 months pregnant, visibly in premature labor. Nathan followed the ambulance to the hospital, keeping his distance but unable to leave. He stayed in the waiting room for hours, without identifying himself, just waiting for news. It was a nurse who finally informed him Emily had given birth to a girl, but there were complications. The baby was in the neonatal ICU, and Emily had lost a lot of blood during delivery. "Are you family?" the nurse asked. "I'm the child's father," Nathan replied, surprising himself by using that word for the first time. The nurse took him to the neonatal ICU, where Nathan saw his daughter for the first time. She was tiny, connected to tubes and monitors, but she was alive. She had Emily's dark hair and something in her eyes, even closed, that reminded him of Sarah. "She'll be fine," the nurse said gently. 8-month premature babies have excellent chances of complete recovery. Nathan couldn't speak. He stood looking at his daughter through the glass of the incubator, feeling a love completely different from anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't possessive, it wasn't obsessive. It was protective, pure, unconditional. "Emily Johnson is asking to speak with you," another nurse said, appearing beside him. Nathan followed to the room where Emily was hospitalized. She looked fragile and pale against the white sheets, but her eyes still had the same determination as always. "You came," she said when she saw him enter. "I saw the ambulance by chance. I wasn't watching you," Nathan hastened to clarify. Emily nodded, studying his face. "You're different." "I'm trying." "To be. Why?" Nathan pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Because you were right. About everything. I was obsessive, controlling, toxic, and I didn't want our daughter to grow up with a father like that." "Our daughter," Emily repeated softly. "If you let me be her father," Nathan said. "I'm not demanding anything. I won't use lawyers or my money to force anything, but if you give me a chance, I would like to try to be the father she deserves." Emily was silent for a long time, observing him. "What did you do in these months, Nathan? You really are different." Nathan told her about therapy, about the painful revelations, about learning the difference between love and obsession. He told her about donating part of his fortune, about stopping surveillance on her, about accepting that he might never deserve a second chance with her. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again," Emily said when he finished. "You hurt me a lot, Nathan, made me doubt my own judgment." "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope a chance to know our daughter, to try to be a good father to her." Emily looked out the hospital window, processing everything. "She'll need special care in the first few weeks. Premature babies are delicate. I'll pay for everything. The best doctors, private nurses, whatever is necessary." "It's not about money, Nathan. I know. It's about trust. It's about proving that I've changed." Nathan took a deep breath. "Emily, if you give me a chance to be our daughter's father, I promise I'll respect all your boundaries. You decide when and how I can see her. You decide if and when we'll talk about about us." "There is no us, Nathan," Emily said firmly. "Maybe there's you, me, and our daughter trying to find a way to coexist. But there is no us." Nathan nodded, swallowing the pain of those words. "I understand. You'll have to prove every day that you've really changed, not just to me, but to her." "I'm willing to do that." Emily closed her eyes, tired. "What shall we call her?" Nathan felt his heart accelerate. It was the first decision they would make together as parents. "You choose." "Sarah," Emily said without hesitation. "Sarah Louise. Sarah for my mother, Louise, because it was the name I always dreamed of giving to a daughter." "Sarah Louise," Nathan repeated, and the name sounded perfect. "It's beautiful. A nurse entered to check Emily's vital signs, interrupting the moment. "The baby is very stable," she informed. "You can see her together when the mother is feeling better." When they were alone again, Emily looked at Nathan with an expression that he couldn't completely interpret. "Nathan?" "Yes?" "Thank you for coming, for being here when she was born, even if by chance. Thank you for letting me stay." It was just a beginning, a fragile beginning full of uncertainties and wounds still open. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in months, Nathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first months of fatherhood were a revelation for Nathan. Sarah Louise spent 3 weeks in the neonatal ICU, and he was present every day, scrupulously respecting the schedules that Emily had established. 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, always with Emily present. He didn't try to negotiate. More time? Didn't use his economic power to pressure? Didn't do anything beyond being exactly what he had promised. A respectful father trying to know his daughter. Emily observed his every move with critical eyes, looking for signs of the controlling man she had known. But instead she saw Nathan patiently learning how to change diapers, how to hold the baby correctly, how to interpret her different types of crying. He bought books about child development and read them religiously, made notes about Sarah Louise's preferences, never questioned Emily's decisions about medical care or routines. "You're being very obedient," Emily commented one day, while watching Nathan rocking Sarah Louise with a delicacy that completely contrasted with the aggressiveness she remembered of him. "I'm trying to show that I can respect boundaries," Nathan replied, not taking his eyes off his daughter. "And how is that for you? Not having control over the situation?" Nathan paused, honestly considering the question. "Terrifying," he admitted, "but also liberating in a way. Not having to be responsible for controlling everything is less tiring than I imagined." Was in these moments of honesty that Emily began to see glimpses of the man Nathan could be when he wasn't dominated by his obsessions. He was intelligent, gentle with his daughter, attentive without being invasive. Sometimes she caught herself observing his hands as he cared for Sarah Louise, remembering how those same hands had touched her with such reverence that night at the hotel. Sarah Johnson, the baby's grandmother, was the first to suggest that perhaps Nathan deserved a real chance. She had been surprised when Emily told her about his past in the shelter where she had worked, and even more surprised to learn that he was the special boy she always talked about. "That boy was wounded, but he wasn't bad," Sarah said one afternoon, as they watched Nathan giving Sarah Louise a bottle. "He just needed someone who believed in him. He deceived me, Mom. Lied about everything." "Wounded people do desperate things," Sarah replied, with the wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for traumatized children. "That doesn't justify it, but it explains it. And look at him now. Do you think he's faking this love for the girl?" Emily didn't think so. Nathan's love for Sarah Louise was obvious and unconditional. He cancelled important meetings not to miss, visiting hours, always arrived punctually, brought simple and appropriate gifts, never anything extravagant that seemed like an attempt to buy affection. The decisive moment came when Sarah Louise had a respiratory crisis at 2 months of age. Emily called Nathan at 3 in the morning, desperate, and he arrived at the hospital in 15 minutes. During the 6 hours that the baby was under observation, he held Emily's hand without saying a word, offering only his silent presence, as comfort. "Why did you come?" Emily asked when Sarah Louise was finally stable. "Because you called me," Nathan answered simply, "and because she's my daughter too. I could have called my mother or a friend." "But you called me," Emily realized. He was right. In a moment of panic, her first instinct had been to call Nathan. Somewhere in her subconscious, she had begun to trust him again. "Nathan," she said slowly, "I want you to know that I see the effort you're making. The change is real." "But," he asked, noticing the hesitation in her voice, "but I still don't know if it's enough. For us, I mean. For anything beyond being Sarah Louise's parents." Nathan nodded, and Emily saw that there was pain in his eyes, but also acceptance. "I understand, and I won't pressure. Whatever happens between us will have to come from you, in your time." It was then that Emily realized something fundamental. For the first time since she had met him, Nathan was offering something without demanding anything in return. He was giving her the power of choice, without manipulation, without pressure, without deadline. "I'd like to try," she said impulsively, surprising them both. "Not a relationship, not yet. But dinner, talking, seeing if we can be friends before thinking about being anything else." The smile that lit up Nathan's face was different from any expression Emily had ever seen on him. It was genuine, hopeful, but also respectful. "I would like that very much," he said. They started slowly. Dinners once a week, always in public places, always with Sarah Louise present. They talked about their daughter, about work, about books, about everything except the complicated past between them. Emily was rediscovering Nathan as a person, and he was learning to know her without the desperate urgency that had marked their previous encounters. It was during one of these dinners that Emily finally asked about therapy. "What was hardest to accept about yourself?" she asked. Nathan thought for a moment. "That my need to control the people I love comes from the fear of being abandoned again, and that fear was destroying any real chance of being loved." "And what changed?" "I realized that I prefer risking losing you by being honest than ensuring losing you by being manipulative." Emily studied him across the table, Sarah Louise sleeping peacefully in the stroller beside them. "Do you still love me, Nathan?" The question caught him by surprise. "Yes," he answered without hesitation, "but it's different now." "Different how?" "Before I loved the idea of possessing you. Now I love who you really are, including your capacity to reject me if that's what's best for you." "And if I say, I want to try? Really try? Not just dinners and conversations?" Nathan felt his heart race but forced himself to stay calm. "I would say that I want that more than anything in the world, but I would also say that you need to be sure. Because if we start again and I mess up again, there won't be a third chance." Emily extended her hand and touched his on the table. "I know, and you need to know that it will be difficult for me to trust you completely again. It may take a long time." "I have the rest of my life," Nathan said, intertwining his fingers with hers. "And if you let me, I'll spend that time proving that I deserve your trust." Emily smiled, the first true smile that Nathan had seen from her in almost a year. "Then let's try. Slowly, carefully, but let's try." That night, Nathan accompanied her home carrying Sarah Louise, who had woken up and was observing her father with curious eyes. At the door of the modest apartment that Emily shared with her mother, they looked at each other with a mixture of nervousness and expectation. "Can I kiss you?" Nathan asked, and Emily realized it was the first time he had asked permission for anything physical between them. "You can," she whispered. The kiss was soft, tentative, loaded with promises and forgiveness. When they separated, Sarah Louise made a sound that could have been approval, making them both laugh. "I think she likes the idea of us having a family," Emily said. "We are a family," Nathan gently corrected. "Regardless of what happens between us, we will always be a family because of her." Emily nodded, finally understanding the difference between the man she had met a year ago and the man who was at her door at that moment. The first had tried to force a family. The second was building one brick by brick with patience and true love. "Good night, Nathan," she said, kissing him once more before entering. "Good night, Emily. Good night, Sarah Louise." As he walked to the car, Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the certainty that he was exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should do, loving exactly the people he should love. And for the first time that love didn't frighten him, it just made him happy. 2 years passed since Emily and Nathan decided to try to rebuild their relationship. Sarah Louise now ran around the house at 2 years old, a smart and affectionate girl who had become the center of both parents' world. The apartment that Emily and Sarah Johnson shared had been transformed into a welcoming home, with toys scattered around the living room and family photos on the walls. Nathan had respected every boundary established by Emily, every request for space, every moment when she needed time. to process her own emotions. They had been officially dating for a year, but still maintained separate homes. Nathan had bought an apartment 2 blocks away, close enough to be present, far enough for Emily not to feel suffocated. The real proof that he had changed came on a Tuesday night, when Emily arrived home visibly disturbed after work. She had gotten a job at a small publishing house, finally realizing her dream of working with books, but the salary was less than what she earned as Nathan's assistant. Did something happen? Nathan asked, immediately noticing her mood when he arrived for the weekly dinner they had established as tradition. "The publishing house is having financial problems," Emily said, serving the simple dinner she had prepared. "I might lose my job." Nathan's first instinct was to offer money, buy the publishing house, solve the problem the way he had always solved everything in life. But instead, he took a deep breath and asked, "How can I help?" "There's nothing you can do," Emily replied, and Nathan realized she was testing him, waiting to see if he would respect this answer. "Okay," he said simply, "but if you want to talk about it, or if you change your mind about letting me help, I'm here." Emily looked at him with surprise and something that could be pride. "Thank you." That night, after Sarah Louise fell asleep, they talked about fears and future, about how to build a life together without Nathan taking control of everything. Emily eventually accepted his help with contacts in the publishing industry, but only information, not direct interference. "You really have changed," she said, lying on the sofa with her head in his lap while they watched a movie. "I'm still changing," Nathan corrected. "Every day. Sometimes I still feel like solving everything. For you, protecting you from any problem. But I'm learning that you're strong enough to fight your own battles. And if I'm not, and if I fail at something important, then I'll be here for you to lean on and try again. Not to solve it for you, but to support you." It was at that moment that Emily realized she was completely in love with the man Nathan had become. Not just attracted, not just willing to try, but deeply, irrevocably in love. "Nathan," she said, turning to look at him. "Yes, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and promise. It was the first time Emily had said this since they had reconnected, the first time the words came from true love instead of desperation or gratitude. "I love you too," Nathan replied, gently kissing her lips. "And this time I know what that really means." The following spring, Nathan proposed to Emily. It wasn't a grand production or an elaborate surprise. It was on a Sunday afternoon, in the park where they used to take Sarah Louise to play. The girl was sleeping in the stroller as they walked hand in hand. "Emily," Nathan said, stopping under a flowering tree, "I know we still have a lot to build together. I know that trust is something earned every day, not just once. But I would like to make this official. I would like you to be my wife." He didn't kneel, didn't take an expensive box from his pocket. Instead, he offered her a genuine choice. "If you want," he continued, "we can start planning a real life together. A home for our family, more children if you want, a real partnership where we make decisions together. But if you're not ready, or if you're never ready, I'll continue loving you exactly the way things are now." Emily looked at him, seeing the man who had learned to love without possessing, to protect without controlling, to be vulnerable without being weak. "Yes," she said, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Yes, I want to marry you." The wedding was small, an intimate ceremony in the garden of the house they bought together, a house they chose together, decorated together, transformed into a home together. Sarah Johnson was the matron of honor, Sarah Louise carried the rings in a flower basket, and Dr. Morris, the psychiatrist who had helped Nathan transform, was one of the witnesses. "You know," Dr. Morris said during the toast, "that marriage isn't the happy ending. It's just the beginning of a new phase of the work of loving someone every day." Nathan and Emily exchanged glances, knowing exactly what he meant. They had learned that true love wasn't a feeling that simply happened, but a choice they made every day. 5 years later, sitting on the porch of the house they had built together, watching Sarah Louise play in the garden with her younger brother, Michael, Emily, and Nathan sometimes talked about the unlikely path that had led them there. Do you regret anything? Emily asked during one of these conversations, her head resting on his shoulder. I regret taking so long to learn to love properly, Nathan replied. I regret having hurt you in the process, but I don't regret the path that brought us here, because I can't imagine having arrived at this love in any other way. Even having started the way it started. Nathan was silent for a moment, considering the question. Especially having started the way it started. We both needed to learn things that we could only learn the hard way. You needed to discover your own strength. I needed to learn that control isn't love. Emily turned to kiss him, a kiss that carried years of growth, forgiveness, and conscious choice to build something beautiful from something that had started broken. Sarah Louise, she called when the girl ran up to them. Tell Daddy what you learned in school today. As their daughter chattered about her science class, Michael slept in Nathan's lap, and Sarah Johnson prepared dinner in the kitchen. Emily looked around and realized they had achieved something that seemed impossible years ago, a family built on true love, mutual respect, and the daily choice to place each other's well-being above their own fears. Nathan had learned that loving someone meant giving them wings, not handcuffs. Emily had learned that she deserved a love that valued her, not that bought her, and together they had discovered that the most beautiful happy ending wasn't one where problems disappeared, but one where two people chose to face problems together, every day for the rest of their lives. On the porch of that house in New York, under the starry sky of a summer night, they had found not only love,